All right. So let's talk about well, all the blackouts and the energy crisis that's going on in China right now. So there are massive blackouts rolling throughout China right now. And they're the worst in at least a decade. And this is probably going to be more and more common. We've been seeing seasonal power outages in China for the last 2 years, but this is way bigger than any of that. So we're going to get into it. I did a whole article actually that I wrote up on China and its energy problems and future, kind of projecting it through the next decade. So I'll try and link that in the description below. People should check it out if you want more of the written word on this topic. But I will say I wasn't expecting giant outages within a couple months of writing that. But now, yeah, there's power shortages hitting 2/3 of China, and it's impacting everything. So let's really get into it. I mean, this is something you don't expect to see a property crisis and then a energy crisis kind of hitting at the same time. But we are in that phase in China. So let's get right down to it. So the first thing to know is about 60% of Chinese energy production comes from coal. the China is so far from the green utopia anyone tries to make it out to be. It's really crazy, and this is greenwashing of a very, very, very dirty economy. China uses, it uses and it mines more than half of the coal on Earth. It uses more than the entire rest of the world combined. Anyone who's trying to tell you China is like a green superpower, a green idol in any way, it's just totally wrong. China is something very, very different. What we're actually seeing with all the renewable energy is more of a propaganda push by the Communist Party, which changed its mind on certain things related to climate change in the last 6-7 years. And that's all fine. But it is very important because coal is what really runs China. And now China's in an energy crunch. And the basic reason why this happened right now, sort of third quarter of 2021, is that China responded to COVID by doing the same thing that China always does, which is just juice the economy, juice heavy industry, keep throwing money into real estate, throw money into infrastructure, spin up even more export production, all that kind of thing. That's what you saw in China. And it just went into overdrive the last 6 to 8 months doing that. But now, northeast coal output in China, a main sort of production region, that's down. Mines were closed. Coal mines in northern China were closed due to safety concerns and certain problems near the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party, happened a couple months ago. And Chinese stockpiles of coal also shrank. So, all of this, all this happened. And then globally, there's even more of a coal shortage going on that we'll talk about a bit later. But what this did in China is it meant that the cost of coal rose a lot. And like I said, 60% of energy production in China comes from coal. So you have to pass on those costs to consumers, right? If it costs you more to run your power plant, you need to charge more for the electricity if you want to stay solvent. But China has capped electricity rates for various reasons. The government keeps them low for social stability and development purposes, and that's all fine. And this is kind of new policy in China. They're trying to transform and improve the electricity sector across the country, but that's a long-term project. And right now, if you have higher production costs, higher cost coal, and you have the inability to raise rates, what you get is a whole swath of power plants that are all running and operating in the red. It costs more to produce the power than they're allowed to charge for it. So what does that mean? That means that a bunch of power plants in China shut down. They shut down because otherwise they were going to go totally bankrupt. And what does that mean? And this is just the cascade. So people who've seen or been experienced any sort of energy crisis, blackouts anywhere in the country, in the United States, in Texas, in California, all this stuff, it's always very similar. Cost goes up. Well, there's a lot of types, but this type of crisis is usually costs go up, power supplies go down, and then grid operators have to make power cuts, and you start seeing blackouts. This is what's usually going on. And so That's what happened in China. That's what happened in China. That started this problem. And now the country is struggling to keep the lights on, and it's rationing electricity all across the country now. It's sort of spread all over. So this is not a good situation. We'll get into why, because energy is really everything. It's the basic input for modern industrial life, and it impacts every single thing that every single industry does all across every economy in the world. It sounds kind of crazy, but that is how important it is. And we'll get into that in a bit, but first let's just talk about how this is not something totally out of the blue, unexpected. How could this happen? Oh my God. You know, you read news articles, it'll be like, oh, totally unexpected. Oh, how could this happen? Oh, came out of nowhere. Same thing they're saying in Europe right now. No, this is not unexpected. This is what a lot of people were saying was going to happen for a very long time, and it's just here. So, like I said earlier, China's been seeing these seasonal power problems for years. Power needs, across an economy are different, not only during a day and during the month, right? So you need less electricity during the day because at different times when you're asleep, you don't need as much electricity. You need more in the morning, you need less in the afternoon, you need more at night, etc. There's a whole cycle to it. It's the same thing during the year. In certain regions, you need a lot of AC in the summer. In other regions, you need a lot of heating in the winter. And this is there's all these different cycles in electricity and power usage. That's fine. For China, these seasonal power problems have been getting worse, particularly in the winter in the south. For the export regions, as they juice things up, and you need more cooling. You need a lot of other things there. This is all the seasonal stuff and all of what we're seeing right now in China. This is part of the same broader issue that there is not enough power in China. There's not enough electricity in China for China's needs. Like, period. As the grand element here is that there's just not enough, and this isn't rocket science. China uses 50% more electricity, and it needs 50% more power than the United States. But it does not have 50% more power sources, supplies. It just doesn't. So China buys it abroad. And the crucial exception to this, foreign purchases of, oil, natural gas, all that kind of stuff, is coal. 90% of Chinese coal comes from China, which is the best thing that ever happened to the Communist Party and their dreams for the last 30 years. It's the reason this country was even able to develop and have stable baseline power for all of its industry, for all the exports, for all the goods it sent all over the world. Not have been possible without coal. Of course, coal has terrible environmental challenges as well. Coal is the dirtiest substance that you could use to create power. But when you're in totally dirt poor China of the 1990s, that is a rather minor thing on their sort of list of priorities. But now China is scrambling to buy international coal because it has all these coal problems in the north. There's coal plants that are shutting down. The stockpiles are getting low. There's just all this stuff. So it needs to tap the sort of international market for coal. China's imports are up over 20% just since June, just of its imports. And it's, it only gets around 7-8% of its coal from abroad. But that's important now when this is going on. So we'll get into that later, how it's just impacting all these foreign energy markets at the same time that you have energy shortages and basically crises going on in Europe as well. So this is becoming a global problem. And what we're actually seeing, whether we want to talk about it or not, is this is part of what we get when we choose to focus more on renewable energy sources like solar and wind at the expense of all of the dirtier fossil fuel technologies. So one of the things going on with China is that in addition to all the weather problems and electricity stuff and surging demand, lower supply, all that kind of stuff that China's experiencing that are causing these coal problems, China is also invested now in this renewable energy transition. But like I said, China uses 50% more electricity than the United States, and transitioning an economy this size to fully renewable is such a large project. This is decades and decades and decades and trillions of dollars from now. And if it's even possible, the truth is that solar and wind technology, the way we have them now, do not work for China. China is a big power player in the renewable energy space because of its exports and because of how crucial it is for the supply chain and the production of things like solar panels. The actual utility of solar panels and wind in China is a lot less viable than anyone seems to be talking about. Basically, the best place for solar in China is in the western regions. It is in the large arid deserts and plateaus and basins in the west, in the northwest and the west of China. That is not where the population centers are. To bring that energy all the way to the east requires a lot of infrastructure, and it creates whole problems for energy reliability. And the truth is, it doesn't pan out economically right now using current technologies at any large scale. The reason they have these giant sites and various solar farms and wind farms basically is because they need the expansive production to justify all the investment they're doing to try and get these giant export markets for foreign currency and to dominate this potential future industry. That's kind of what's going on. But the ability to run all of Chinese heavy industry and power and steel and fertilizer and plastics and glass and all these other production needs on solar panels is so far from even possible right now. It's pretty crazy that we just don't talk about it. But China has been trying to balance this need for, well, reliable baseload power through coal and pretty much through coal, and then this transition. But all this crisis that we're seeing in part is because China is trying to move away from coal. This is this year and a couple months ago was really the first time Xi Jinping or any Chinese leader said when they were going to move away from coal. He said it was going to be starting at 2026, which is 4 or 5 years from now. But even that is probably not possible. But there's so much pressure globally and internally within China to start showing that China's in the vanguard of this move away from fossil fuels and into the renewable future that it's even affected some of what we're seeing now. And we'll get into that a little bit. But first, there's also this other element here of just all of China's terrible political relations right now are coming back to bite it. So China's getting punched in the mouth for this long battle it's had with Australia over the origins of COVID, as well as a bunch of other issues, basically related to the fact that Australia is allied with the United States. These relations between these two countries have been getting worse for years, and last year it resulted in a bunch of basically China stopped accepting coal and iron. I think iron, definitely coal, but imports from Australia. It stopped importing from Australia as a way to punish the country for all these things. Well, this just goes to show who has the real power in these sort of buyer-seller relationships here. China knocked out the coal and these other imports, but that only works if you have a secure energy supply and you can go get your coal from other places. And it did. It moved. It's getting a lot of Indonesian coal and stuff like that now. But in the end, ultimately, China has a weak hand here, and it probably is too proud to actually say, "Hey, Australia, we're going to ditch this ban. We're seeing blackouts all across our country. Maybe we should accept your coal." They're probably not going to do that. But you have China's experiencing a coal shortage that's maybe 20% of what it needs, and it needs all of the coal it can get. And this is only going to get worse because winter is coming, quite literally, and that's going to require a lot more coal because basically 80% of heating in China comes from its heating is done through coal. So that's a problem. And this whole thing is becoming a bit of a farce. It's like this is China's attempt to be like this global superpower type country, but you're dependent on all of these different countries in a way that the United States is really, really not. And what's even worse about this is that all these tensions with Australia just sort of recently resulted in a major military technology transfer alliance between the US, the UK, and Australia that's going to result in nuclear submarines being built in Australia, either with US help or using US designs or UK designs, whatever it is. And the transfer of all sorts of technologies resulted to submarine use, many long-range missiles, all this stuff that is entirely designed to thwart, combat, balance against China. So China is now in a position where it looks pretty foolish and antagonistic because it is deeply in need of the resources of a nearby country that just joined basically a military alliance to try and thwart its ambitions. So it's not a good thing. And the truth is that this coal thing, all these political problems, the broader energy problems, the energy crisis we're seeing in Europe as well, all this is not good really for the world at all right now. Like Europe, China is going to see a pretty rough winter. Like I was saying earlier, coal demand is higher than ever. It's going to go up this winter, and the supply is low because there's bad weather in Indonesia and Colombia, and obviously can't use Australian coal, which is 30% better actually, more efficient than Indonesian coal. So you really would want to use Australian coal, but I guess you can't. All this is impacting coal all around the world, and production of coal is 5% lower this year, or I guess you could say last year, or basically last year and as well this year, than 2019 levels, because there wasn't this investment. So banks are basically forbidding a lot of lending to coal companies, to various mining companies, and all this. And this is fine in the sense of, well, that helps combat climate change, but in the near term, we're starting to see huge consequences throughout the energy economies of major countries in Europe and Asia. And it's pretty unclear how this gets resolved with any sort of renewable energy push. You can't. Places like Germany don't run on solar panels because there's no sun there. Neither does Britain. And then you add all this stuff. One reason there's also problems in China is the hydroelectric dams and other things. Other of the more intermittent sources of energy in China are struggling for various just sort of geographic, climatic reasons. Bad weather, bad rain, more this, more that. We're seeing that in all across the world, and it's impacting all these resources. And it's true that coal is also impacted, like I was saying, with the rain in other countries. But you can stockpile these reserves. You can do all that, where the battery technology and the battery build out for all that kind of stuff for renewables isn't there yet. It's not coming in a year or two. It's coming in 5, 6, 8 years maybe. So in the meantime, there's a major challenge. And what's really happening is that coal prices are rising, and a lot of countries are switching to coal. In Europe right now, it makes more sense to transition from gas to coal in a lot of countries to make that switch, to build. For example, Germany has, I think, 6 nuclear power plants that it plans to shut off for the next 3-4 years. Economically, the best, if you were just an energy producer and you had to choose, all right, which sort of plant do I make to replace these plants, these nuclear plants? You'd go for coal because the prices are high and you'd make the most money off of it. But you can't do that. You can't do that, at least with the political climate. And that's a limit, but ultimately countries are being forced to use coal whether we want it or not, because there's not really other options. The way, the United States is very blessed in this sense that it seems to have various options that other countries don't have. Russia is currently limiting gas supplies into Europe, basically to squeeze them, and that is making it really hard to run things. So you don't have gas, you're limited on coal. You can't suddenly make giant solar farms or fields of wind turbines. So you're really stuck. And what we're going to see more and more of is more countries just moving to coal because there's no other option. And that's going to raise the price of coal. And it's going to bring up all sorts of questions about whether we should still be investing in coal. And it's going to, we'll get into that in a little bit. But as I was saying, prices are going up. Newcastle coal, which is this Asian benchmark, it's an Australian coal. It's 3 times higher in price than it was in 2019. So, yeah, I mean, this is bad. And in China, heating and powering households is going to be a challenge through the winter. I mean, there's already China's forcing major commercial and residential power users, power cuts to users all across the country. There's less heating, You're allowed. In China, this means less heating for your home. It means using your appliances less, turning them off, cooking quicker. For businesses, it means shutting down elevators. For shutting down factories, even traffic lights in different cities get shut down. Every single thing can be shut. Will be monitored and metered because this is what happens. As I was saying earlier, energy is everything. Our modern industrial world runs on energy. The way the agricultural world ran on agriculture, we run on energy. Even our agriculture runs on energy because we need energy to make the fertilizer, to run the irrigation pumps, to do all of that. You take away energy and everything just breaks down. So as I was saying on some other podcasts I was on recently, the crazy emphasis people remember from the mid-2000s where the U.S. was so obsessed with energy. It was in the Middle East. Everyone was wondering, suspiciously wondering whether the U.S. was really just there to take oil to do this. There's obviously, you don't want to do any stuff like that, but the core idea behind all that energy is the core of modern economies, and it's a major vulnerability for countries, for regions, and major inducement to violence and war. That's all true. That is still true. And next couple of years, we're really going to see what that means for the global economy, because it is going to be rough to keep the lights on everywhere, especially in a place like China, where the problem for China is that its needs are so big that it's really gonna have to pay to make this work. It has to pay. You can't bully anybody into selling you things. I mean, how do you bully a country like Colombia in the Western Hemisphere in South America to send you its coal? How do you do that? You can't really do that. There's really no way you'll ever be able to do that. So this is definitely a seller's market, and it's going to be very punishing for a lot of countries, and China's really at the top of the list. And the thing about energy is that it really impacts everything. We take it for granted until it's gone. And the basic consequences for all this are extreme. So just some quick takeaways for all this. This isn't going to be the end. This isn't like the end of, power isn't just going to shut down in China. It's just going to go dark forever. That's not what we're looking at. But these energy problems, they matter for everyone, and they're impacting China, and they're part of this larger global issue over the sort of, maybe we'll call it the twilight years of fossil fuel use, if you want to be very, very generous about the potential for a renewable energy transition at all to work, because it's becoming pretty clear that in a lot of countries, their option isn't renewable energy or dirty energy. It's dirty energy or no energy. I mean, at least in the next 5-10 years, you're not going to see investment in any of these places that would be able to transition them. So a place like India, which also has a massive coal fleet, isn't going to be able to decarbonize just on what resources. But we'll leave that for another episode. But right now, we're seeing Chinese manufacturing is in total disarray. So all this stuff about factories shutting down and lights turning off and all these problems, this just crushes the reliability you need to have heavy, consistent output from all these factories to send all these goods all over the world. This is going to cascade through to just cause further problems throughout supply chains and all around the world for products, just every single little product you can imagine. This is adding to all the problems that just show that this world of globalized production and sort of decoupled production and consumption is being challenged, to say the least. So this is a major thing. This also could really impact Chinese politics. This is kind of less interesting for people, but that is a huge thing. The CCP is very invested in an energy transition, in being at the global vanguard of things, of improving things, of showing Chinese people that even though the luster of the Chinese economy is disappearing, that things aren't going to get worse, things can get better. But now you have coal, right? You have people can't use their appliances. They have to turn off the TV. maybe you have you could have internet problems. You could have all sorts of things that start coming out and become part of life. The more these seasonal energy challenges get extreme, you could see major challenges to the Communist Party's ability to convince people that this is the good life they were promised. But we got to remember, this isn't just China. So I'm focused on China, and this is a China event right now. And these massive, once a decade blackouts, or at least once in the last decade, it could be multiple times this decade. This is also happening in Europe right now. So you got to remember, I mean, there's like what 9 British energy companies that have gone under that went bankrupt just in September, and every country has their own weird, peculiar energy market, their weird, peculiar sort of systems, and it's not as rational as anyone wants it to be, and that's fine. But these are real energy shortages, and they're becoming frequent. And like I was saying earlier, this is where the rubber really hits the road on green energy policies. So the timing of the European challenges and then this Chinese power crisis is pretty exceptional, just because there is a major gathering. I can't remember where it is. It might be in Glasgow or some other place, where people are getting together to talk again about what to do about climate change. And we have to realize that when there's an energy shortage, the most likely the fuel source that countries and people and businesses turn to when things go bad is coal. So if you allow energy shortages through various policies, not even through various policies, although in Europe you're getting rid of nuclear power plants, you're doing all sorts of things to align with green policies, it is pushing investment away from all these other industries, which is fine. Maybe you don't want investment in mining and gas and oil and all that, but when you get the shortages, countries move back to coal because you have no other option. And that's pretty bad, because that is the worst result you could have for the environment. If you create a situation, or if a situation arises where countries don't have the energy they need and the only option is coal, and they move to coal, that's not good. And I think there's a lot of expectation that, hey, if we make life really bad for oil and gas companies, which have had a major influence in governments and things all over the world and all this stuff, so that's all true. If we make it tough for them, this will force us to move quicker to green energy and green technologies. Probably not. It just probably won't work that way, because the way that would happen is you'd have to have these green companies able to take up the slack to build out all this stuff. It's not what we're seeing anywhere, really. There's certain places you see that in little regions, but in a place like China, which has 1/3 of global manufacturing production capacity, basically, it produces 1/3 of the major finished manufactured goods on Earth. All those factories, they all run on fossil fuels, and to transition all of them to green power sources, that is a long process. That's not going to happen anytime soon. And that was kind of what I was saying earlier. We're trying to greenwash this country is not the best idea. But also, we can't try and greenwash the expected future of the next 5-10 years. I know the challenge of climate change seems to be getting worse every year, but this can only be dealt with if you actually have a plan that doesn't cause major energy problems in the meantime. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. I mean, people can check out, I have that, like I mentioned earlier, I have an article about China in specific on the energy issue in China, just what China can do in the next decade for its energy needs. And the basic final answer for it, for China at least, you're not going to have any renewable economy anytime soon. And the best bet is actually nuclear power. There's problems with that too, but that is the best bet China has. It's a very dangerous time that we live in, because the threat of climate change is going to clash with the threat of more immediate power crises. This is going to cause even more brutal, grueling political disagreements between the right and the left in various, democratic countries. So there's going to be more of people on the right saying, hey, if you just phase all this stuff out too quickly, then we're going to have energy shortages, which is part of what I've been saying. Not that I agree with that. I think this is just for the local reason. That is a major thing going on right now, but that is the conservative argument too. It's you're going to have all these energy problems. And on the left, you get more of, well, you can't just have fossil fuels running forever and not invest and then say everything will go terrible. Meanwhile, we don't ever make the actual investments needed to scale all this up. So you have to do it. And for a long time, the policies were on the side of more traditional industry, conservative politics, in the sense of there's a lot of subsidies to fossil fuel companies. There's a lot of investment. All the other stuff was more marginal. The solar, the wind, the electric cars, all that was more marginal. Now things are transitioning to the other side, though, which is why I focused on this episode, because in the last 6 months, 12 months, so many countries have put out plans to electrify their fleets and to decarbonize their economies. And it's all pushing 2030, 2040, 2050. Every major country is in a race to compete to see who can do this better and more quickly and more effectively and more efficiently. And most of these countries have not really thought through what any of this means. It's pretty crazy. So in Europe, for example, there's like 7 countries that are planning to get rid of coal in the next 3 years. So a bunch of countries. But in Europe, for the last 9 years, aggregate coal burns, use of coal and energy and stuff, that's gone up every single year for 9 years. So you have all these countries saying, oh, we're going to get rid of all this coal, we're going to get rid of everything, it's going to be great. Yet, meanwhile, in the background, every year you're burning more coal. And it's just like that in China, where there's just can't get rid of coal in any reasonable time frame. And we don't have a good conversation about what this really can look like. Can we find some sort of middle ground here where we can both do the investment on the green energy side, yet somehow maintain the stability of the basic infrastructure on the right side? Because one of the problems is if you start totally demonizing all these natural fossil fuel companies, all the Shells, Exxons, whatever of the world, and also the natural gas and coal producers, it means that none of their equipment, you don't get any investment, you don't get any maintenance, you don't get any new facilities that are maybe greener, that are more efficient. So you end up with just facilities and infrastructure that is really old, and it's easy to break. It can't be maintained. You might not have parts for it, and it just creates more instability in a sense. I know people want, let's move away entirely from all of this. Let's like burn them, starve them of money, and just have them die away. Problem is, you have to be able to replace all of that energy production in a reasonable time frame with affordable, reliable, and secure power sources. So that's a challenge. And a country like Germany is really feeling the heat for deciding to get rid of all of its nuclear power. And one of the consequences is that, you need to have a big pipeline to Russia, to Russia to give you gas because you have to make up for it that way. And then ultimately, you're probably just going to have to burn a bunch of coal, whether you want to admit it or not. And we're getting into this really weird place where nobody wants to talk about energy and like how we could find some kind of middle ground here. And we're literally seeing crazy chaos in energy markets, this entire month. And all the COVID stuff is just, this is one of those things that's just so caught up in all the other problems. No one can even focus on it. But you do focus on it when energy problems hit, like we saw in Texas, and you just have this massive freeze, and you knock out all this production. It's crazy, and it means massive suffering, massive disruptions of life, of business, of everything. So we really have to think about that. No answer on that today, but I mean, the real question behind it all is basically, can we have a peaceful, green, and well-lit world using just the sort of favored new green energy technologies of today? And unfortunately, it doesn't look like we can. And this winter, Europe and China are probably going to show us why.